All right, now that you've watched the first part on the Screencastify, just kind of laying out the basics and what the sheets mean, I now want to kind of give you an idea of what this looks like in the classroom. Some of the things that you're going to need is cardstock. The cardstock is going to be for creating the different carbon pools that you're going to use in this lab activity. There are several different ones. If you remember the station cards I showed you in the Screencastify, you will make those, cut those out, and for each station, you're going to create a little table tent with the name of each of the carbon pools. So wood products, forest, soil carbon, deep ocean, marine life, animals, atmosphere, and ocean surface, which I'm going to show you in just a second as I show you how to set this up in your classroom. Don't forget that for each of those stations, you'll need to have the card that tells them when they roll the dice what they actually are going to do and what happened to their carbon atom and how they move through a carbon flux from one carbon pool to the next. So this is a really good activity for getting the students moving around and for you to be able to assess them as well. I know one of the Marzano strategies was organizing students to interact. This is a great way to be able to do that. So what I want to do now is each student will have this sheet, which I showed you is this student sheet, and they're going to write down where they start. So you can assign them, they can take the die and roll where they're going to start, but let me show you kind of how this would be set up in the classroom. So we're going to move right over here to a sample lab table just so that you can see this setup. And you would have the table tent, you would also have the actual card which goes through all 6 things that happen when they roll the die. So if I'm a student, I'm approaching with my sheet, I get here to the station, I will take the die that's at the station, I'll roll it, I get a 5. Well, I would write down ocean surface in number 1, and then I would look at number 5, which says, an algae plant takes you in during photosynthesis. Go to marine life. Well, I would then write photosynthesis as my carbon flux. That's how I move from one carbon pool to the other, which was photosynthesis. Now, a little tip here. When you do this lab, I would highly encourage that the students have an extra sheet or even the back of their sheet to write little notes, such as how they went through photosynthesis. Where it says an algae takes you in, I would have them write down as a little note, algae took me in and used me as photosynthesis. Then on this last part, I would put marine life because that's the next station. And so then the student would walk to the next station, there would be a dice there, they would roll the die and they would keep playing until they get through number 8. Once they get through number 8, they've played the game, they've seen their carbon pathway, they see how they move from one carbon pool to the next and the different fluxes of how they move from one to the next. Now, the next part of this lab, which I want to go over with you, is where the students really show you what they've mastered, what they've learned in this activity. It's your assessment process. There are 2 ways to do this. If you remember on the Screencastify, I showed you this one right here where you can create the different bubbles and they can explain using arrows how they move throughout and they answer questions. One alternate way to do this, which I really enjoy and the students love, is through a little carbon cycle game comic strip. And in this game, they have their boxes. The first one is an example one for you as the teacher to be able to say, hey, here's how this works. And so they would put the name of the carbon pool above the box. They would then draw whatever happened in that picture. So for instance, I'm in the ocean surface. I draw a surface of the ocean. I put a little circle with the C, which stands for carbon atom. Then I write an explanation of what happened to me. And I just said, I am a carbon atom on the surface of the ocean. And then the students would look at their sheet, their student sheet, and they'd say, okay, from the surface of the ocean, I went to marine life. And then they would show and explain how that works. And they would color and draw and they would do this. And it's like a comic strip, a story of how their carbon atom moved from one carbon pool to the next. It's a really fun activity. The students have really enjoyed this, and you're going to get a chance to look at a few examples here in a few moments and see how you can maybe adapt it for your classroom and what you feel fits best for your students. But this is the carbon cycle game, and the carbon cycle pathway. I wanted to hopefully give you a look at what it would look like in your classroom. It's a really simple setup, really get students moving around. And that's one of the Marzano strategies, as well as using physical movement. And I think this would be a great one for you to be able to utilize in your classroom.